What's up, riderz Nation? Today, you're going to come with us on a journey as we transform riderz Nation YouTube channel into riderz Nation and the 2024 Las Vegas Raiders season preview. Let's cue the intro and get to it. If this is your first time on the riderz Nation YouTube channel, thanks for checking us out. If you are a subscriber, no worries. We're still mainly about motorcycles, as you can tell. And we will continue to always be mainly about motorcycles. But we are about diversifying here at the riderz Nation YouTube channel. So today we diversify by transforming to the riderz Nation YouTube channel for this special video. Sometimes we like to dive into other topics, and today is one of those times. So I'm going to toss it over to my partner, and he can introduce himself and explain how he fits in over here.
How you guys doing? Happy to be here. All right, so growing up, you were a Raiders fan, I was a Giants fan. We always talked football. You played football and were very good at it, and had a different perspective because you were part of the front lines of the sport. So, again, but the question I had asked you is, how did you become a Raiders fan? And there were some significant moments in time where you can kind of draw from. So, why don't you go back into that, what we were recently talking about how that started for you?
I was 8 years old. It was 1982. It was the AFC divisional playoff game. The Raiders were playing the Jets. And Lyle Alzado, the original Darth Raider, ripped off a Jets offensive tackle's helmet and threw it at him. And prior to that, I mean, I was only 8 years old, but prior to that, I really think I was a Jets fan. And at that moment, I turned around, looked at my father, and said, I'm a fan of Hit, and I'm a Raiders fan. And the next season, they won the Super Bowl, beating the Washington Redskins. And I thought that was going to happen every year from there.
Well, it's always interesting, too, because we're both Jersey guys. And from our area, everybody's either a Jets fan, a Giant fan, Cowboy fan, America's team, and you're a Raiders fan. So it's interesting to hear how it started for you. Let's go to the Raiders 2023 review and your take on it.
Oh, you're talking about the tale of two seasons?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that I don't ever remember a team having two different seasons like that in the one season. So we got the first half of the season, which we'll refer to as the Josh McDonkey era, because he's a McDonkey, where they just could not.
So not a fan.
Not a fan. No, not a fan of the McDonkey. I just don't have much good things to say about McDonkey with the Raiders.
Well, we've talked football a lot through the years, right? And one of the things that I've always had to take on is you can have offensive coordinators who are the best coordinators in football, but you got to be a head coach is a different ballgame. You got to be a leader of men, right? So
to me,
that's
he has no leadership ability at all. He tried to be Bill Belichick, and he's not Bill Belichick. It didn't work for him when he was in Denver, and it didn't work for him when he was in Vegas, and I really don't think he's going to get another chance. The only real chance I see him having is if somebody hires Belichick next year. McDonkey, the Belichick fanboy, may get to latch on to him and go with him.
Well, the statement that you made, like parlaying on the statement that you made, you were saying about a tale of two seasons, and you guys brought in my guy from my Giant fan. I'm a big fan of Antonio Pierce. So parlaying from the first half, how much of an impact would you say that Antonio Pierce made to change the whole spectrum of where they were headed?
He did a lot of significant cultural changes. You're in the middle of the season, so you really can't change the offense. You really can't change the defense for that matter. What he did almost immediately is change the culture. He came out in his press conference who references NWA in their NFL press conference. The answer is nobody does. He did. He referenced growing up in Los Angeles and being a Raiders fan. He referenced the fact that he wanted them to become more physical. He was going to change the culture. He did little things. He brought music back at practice. Like, do I think that's a big deal? No. Do I think that's going to win you football games? Absolutely not. It's going to make your players happy to come to work? Yeah, and I think it did. He stopped micromanaging. It looked, I think, to most fans like McDonkey was a dictator and was a micromanager. And Antonio Pierce didn't do that.
Even best teams, right, have leaders that are all over the place, right? They're not micromanaged. You actually buy in, right?
He really came across as a manager. He was going to manage. I mean, he did right off the bat, significant change. He changed out quarterbacks. He sent Garoppolo to the bench, where Garoppolo, the first half of the season, he looked lost. He looked lost in an offense that he supposedly knew.
That was even the question about that.
He looked completely lost. They definitely dumbed down that offense when Antonio Pierce took over. But they dumbed it down. They brought O'Connell in. He was only going to be a game manager. He really only was a game manager. But he signified a change. So you fire your general manager. You fire your head coach. You fire your offensive coordinator. All in the middle of the season. And on top of that, you change your quarterback for a rookie 4th round draft pick.
More than probably most sports, you got to play together, especially your lines. Their line play, guys have to be pulling in the same direction. And if you get a head coach that's kind of setting that tone,
it seemed like every player on that team was an individual until AP took over, and then
that's significant if you get that kind of change.
Almost immediately, it changed. Look, they weren't great. They didn't make the playoffs. They didn't have a winning record, but they were a lot better of a team to win. There's really two highlights.
See a light at the end of the tunnel.
There was 2 highlights to the 2023 season. Number one, put 63 points up against the Chargers. It was absolutely a highlight to the season, and beating the Chiefs on Christmas Day was a huge win.
It shows their
for the organization. And I think it really, winning on Christmas Day against the Chiefs really locked AP in for he had to get the job or the fans were going to lose their mind. And I think some of the players were going to lose their mind. Who I dare anyone with a straight face to tell me that they thought Antonio Pierce was on the radar to be the head coach. because he wasn't.
No, it was a surprise to.
It was a surprise to everyone. It was probably a surprise to the players also. It was a huge surprise. Thought he did an amazing thing right off the bat was he picked the phone up and he called Tom Coughlin, who was his coach, and he asked for advice. And then he called Marvin Lewis up, uh, who coached him in Washington and also coached with him at Arizona State, and he asked him advice. And Marvin Lewis actually flew out to Las Vegas and spent a couple days there. Really
Two
advised.
excellent choices, too smart.
Right. I thought that was a great thing. Instead of the guy walking in and saying, I'm the head coach, we're going to do it my way. Instead of doing that, he went to his coaches and got advice about how he moved from there. And I felt one of his biggest moves, per se, was to allow his assistant coaches to coach.
The good leader knows he doesn't have all the answers.
And to allow his players to be involved in things that normally players, I don't think, are usually involved in.
He creates buy-in and makes them own it.
Mm-hmm. So it was really a tale of two seasons. We were spiraling the toilet, and all of a sudden that stopped immediately, even though we continued to not win every game. But you could really tell we were no longer spiraling. The players couldn't hide the fact that they were happier to play for Antonio Pierce than they were for the McDonkey. It was interesting to watch, although the play on the field, it did get better, especially on defense. It really seemed like once Antonio Pierce got in there, he really handed the entire defense over to Patrick Graham and said, do your job, which was good to see because they finished the season as a top 10 defense.
So now, obviously, off-season happens, and they make the decision to keep him on. Smart decision to keep Antonio Pierce on. But I'm sure there was quite a few things in the off-season, moves, coaching staff, and I'm sure there was a lot of things that went on going in as we move forward.
Smart decision or dumb decision, Mark Davis and the Raiders, to me, didn't really have any choice. They had to hire AP. I mean, they interviewed. I don't even remember who they interviewed. It really felt fake, like the decision had already been made. They didn't really have a choice. So they cleaned that up really quick. They hired Telesco as the GM. You know, I don't know much about him. It usually, to me, it doesn't matter. You got to give a GM 3 or 4 years to be able to look back at his free agent acquisitions, who he lets go in free agency, and who he drafts. You got to get some kind of 3-4 year track record before you make a decision on a GM. I think with a coach it's a little different. Maybe the wins don't come, but usually you can see the culture change.
Oh, that's definite. Well, look, the old rule of thumb is always, you got a new, qualified, good coach. He's coming to a new program. 4 years, he's just build it up. By the 4th year, he's making a run in the postseason.
One of the big moves that nobody seems to talk about that I thought was a big move was they hired Telesco to be the GM. The guy who was the interim GM, Champ Kelly, they also retained him as the assistant general manager.
So you see a little continuity there.
Yeah, I thought Champ Kelly did a good job last year after he got elevated to interim GM. I mean,
I've never been a fan of completely cleaning house unless it's completely necessary.
Yeah, and they weren't. The Raiders definitely didn't completely clean house in any way for this. Champ Kelly went out the middle of last year and picked up Jack Jones who right now looks like the #1 defensive back on the team. I didn't really know who Jack Jones was, other than the fact that he tried to carry a gun onto an airplane, which is never a good idea. He did not fit in. He was on the Patriots. He didn't fit in to Bill Belichick's way of doing things. Belichick released him, and the Raiders picked him up. He has a connection to Antonio Pierce. Antonio Pierce coached him in high school and again in college. He immediately came into the Raiders, and
The other thing too, like,
he helped with the culture change.
well, I'm noticing from what you're saying, and I didn't know any of this. A lot of this, um, it seems like Antonio Pierce he was never a head coach, but it seems like he's always been for a long time on that fringe of being that coach and being a coach.
He was a middle linebacker, so he was the field general for the defense. I think, I think that helps.
But it seems like he's always had an affinity or passion to do that.
I think he likes to teach. You can see that he was a teacher on the field, especially when he was
As a Giant,
was
he
a
definitely
Giant.
is, yeah.
So I think that goes in. Look, it's too early to tell whether Antonio Pierce is going to be a.
The one thing I always liked about him as a Giant fan that I have vivid memories of, he wasn't afraid to kick somebody in the ass when he needed either. Like if somebody wasn't paying attention to their assignment, you'd see him getting their drill.
Yeah, I don't see him being that kind of coach either.
But I'm saying he's not going to let something go unaddressed.
Yeah. I believe he's going to be. He's a player's coach. He's not old. He played in the league. I think he's going to hug the players that need a hug and kick the players in the ass that need a kick in the ass. That's kind of how it looks. Only time will tell. And, half a season is not really going to tell us that. The off season looked good. Training camp looked good. We'll see what the first quarter year looks like.
It's actually pretty good too that he's not coming in like we were talking about, like a know-it-all. Like he knows that he needs other pieces in place, and he's not trying to run the whole thing and micromanage.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to he assembled a coaching staff. It was an interesting coaching staff. I can't call it anything else other than interesting. He went in and he hired Marvin Lewis as assistant head coach. Smart. I thought it was a great move.
Great.
He brought Joe Philibon in, that has head coaching experience as a senior offensive assistant.
Dolphins, right?
But yes, I thought that was a great move. I'm not crazy. On its face, I'm not crazy with the offense coordinator, Luke Getsy from the Chicago Bears. I do like the 2 tight end set that he likes to run. I do like that. But, he didn't do much with Justin Fields. That doesn't look good. The Bears were not very good offensively. So we'll have to see within the first 4 games how it looks. Offensive line coach James Craig, I'm not a big fan. They retained Patrick Graham as defense coordinator. I thought that was great. One thing I did think was really good was he brought in a couple ex-players to be position coaches. What's up, everyone? If you like this video, please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and hit the like button and leave us some comments. It really helps the channel out. We have very big plans for the channel. We want to do lots of things, but it all starts with you by hitting that subscribe button, giving us some likes, and giving us some comments so we know we're doing good things that you are watching. Thank you all, and let's get back to the video.
All right, so let's talk about camp. About how camp is going so far.
Camp started off interesting. They did something that they haven't done. They spent the first 2 weeks of training camp in the Los Angeles area. which I thought was really cool for fans like me that remember the LA Raiders. I thought it was very cool. It was a great idea. It was based on weather. Las Vegas is impossibly hot this time of year. And it was to pull the team out of Las Vegas to be able to build team bonding, and continue to cultivate that culture. I thought that was a great idea. 2 weeks, they had at least one open practice, which the Raiders never do. The Raiders never open up their practices. They had at least one open practice in LA, and they've had 2 or 3 open practices in Vegas. It's a completely different. I mean, to keep saying the same word over and over again, it's a completely different culture. McDaniels and Gruden was the same way. These guys were practicing at 7 o'clock in the morning outside in Las Vegas trying to beat the Heat. AP practices at nighttime inside to beat the Heat. Opens the practice up. Their first open practice at Allegiant Stadium had 40,000 fans there.
Yeah, you were telling me that. Like, I was used to the Giants always being wide open.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a different culture. They're trying to send a different message to the fan base. AP seems to be very dialed in to the fan base.
Well, the fan base, I mean, this is not really on any main subject, but the one uniqueness I've always thought about the Raiders, being a Giant fan, is that the Raiders identify as the Oakland Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Raiders. Like, they changed to Vegas, but they're still considered the Los Angeles.
Oh, absolutely.
They've always kept their identity from every place they've gone.
I saw something.
They're probably the only team in the league that has ever done that.
I saw something on the Raiders website that just made me laugh. I don't think any other team in the history of the NFL has ever sold merchandise from where they used to be. If you go on the Raiders website, you can now buy Los Angeles Raiders merchandise, Oakland Raiders merchandise.
That's pretty cool.
And Las Vegas Raiders merchandise. AP, I think, did an incredible job with training camp. Off the field, who knows what kind of job these guys do on the field until you get into real games.
Well, that's why it's a three-game thing for me. Like, I've always looked at football after preseason. You got the first 3 games. Okay, let's start evaluating where you think this team's going to go.
It's never a good idea to me to be a fan that watches one game, your team goes 0-1, and they're like, "Oh, they're terrible."
Yeah, I think that's funny. That's like,
you gotta give your team 4 games.
see
Every team
they're going to gel. See how different components are going to work together.
But so far, so good. He looks good. Nothing looks good on the field. For most teams, nothing.
The other
looks
aspect too is how well did your team do at creating depth, including the practice squad, to where you can sustain injuries on your lines.
I think it's tough. I think it's tough. I think it's tough in the beginning to create depth. I think that takes a couple years to develop depth on your team. Unfortunately, as you said earlier, no, they did not clean house. They didn't. But there was enough turnover, and I think such a difference in ideology between Pierce and McDonkey that you did have a lot of turnover. So, how good the depth is, you're going to deal with injuries. Every NFL team deals with injuries. What comes of that, nobody will know until it happens.
And you watch some of the greatest teams. I mean, honestly, I'm not a Patriots fan. but you have to kind of respect what they did for all that period of time. It's not just as simple as, well, they had Tom Brady, right? They had continuity. They had a lot of the, and if you didn't fit their plan or their system or what Belichick's thing is, you were gone. But for the most part, they had structure that created consistency.
Well, I think
That's a winning formula.
if we're talking about the Patriots, my take on the Patriots is they had the triangle. So you had the single best quarterback in the history of the NFL, and
Winner.
all personal feelings and opinions aside,
It's not about stats. I mean, it's not
he
about
is
flashy stuff.
the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. And then you had a great defensive mind, a great coach. And then at the top, you had an owner that let them do their thing.
And it was consistent too.
I think that's where the consistency
Yeah.
comes from. Is you let Bill Belichick do what Bill Belichick does. And Bill Belichick allows Tom Brady to do what Tom Brady does. And then Robert Kraft allows both Bill Belichick and Tom Brady to do what they do. I think that's it's a winning plan in any professional sport.
And you don't let anything penetrate that. Like, right? You don't fit into that.
Right.
You don't stick. It don't matter how good a player you are either. So that's another thing that other players see. Like, we need to conform and do what we need to do.
I thought that the Raiders created a lot more competition at a lot more positions. Very few positions. I think the Raiders really slotted in a starter from the start of training camp.
Competition's a healthy thing for a team.
And another thing that I thought was a great thing was just about every player played in preseason. All the starters. If you were healthy,
Yeah, you told me that last week off camera. I was really surprised.
You were playing in the preseason game. Some players played 2-3 quarters. That became a trend in the NFL the last couple of years. Starting stars don't play in the
They
preseason.
need reps just as much. Like, I never understood that.
You could absolutely see the difference. The first 2 or 3 games of the season were like preseason games. So I thought it was great that they had them play. Some played a lot, some didn't play a lot, but almost everybody played as long as you were healthy. I think that's a great thing.
I agree. Including the quarterbacks too. Like, you need the reps. Especially quarterbacks.
So we'll start with where I think they're headed. I think the outlook long term right now looks good. The expectations look, the Raiders in reality have been a losing franchise for years. But they're really no different. Their fan base is no different than the Yankees. Every year,
A huge fan base.
we expect a winner. Every single year.
Is that why every year you tell me the Raiders are going to win Super Bowl?
It's why I'm not gonna do. It's why I'm not gonna go down the schedule and tell you who I think's gonna win, because I think the Raiders are gonna win. Because that's the way.
Your expectations have been.
That's the way we are. So the outlook, overall, the long-term outlook looks good right now. I think the Raiders were. I think the Raiders probably made the right moves by not trading their future and crazy amounts of draft picks to move up to get a quarterback. Unfortunately, it put them in a position where they have a journeyman quarterback that we're hoping. And look, I've been a Raiders fan for a long time.
He's still pretty young though, right?
The Raiders have a history of pulling guys off the junk heap that take them to Super Bowls. So, like, and the last one was Rich Gannon. Like, nobody remembers or thinks back to the fact that when the Raiders signed Rich Gannon, he was pretty much a journeyman backup. And then he was MVP of the league, and then he took him to the Super Bowl. Now they lost, but he took him to the Super Bowl. Before that, there was Jim Plunkett. Jim Plunkett was a highly touted first round draft pick that was a bust. Goes around the league, comes to the Raiders, and wins not one but two Super Bowls. So there's a history there where Minshew could come in. He's mobile. He is a gunslinger. He's going to throw the ball up there. I don't think he has the greatest arm, but he's going to throw it, and he's going to run. And he's got the right attitude. It seems he fits the culture. So I think the expectations are always high in Raider Nation. That's why we all think they're going to the Super Bowl every year. I think the long-term outlook looks good.
Why don't you go a little bit over about who the Raiders are going to be playing this year? And, let's not get predictions, but kind of see how they're navigating and who their teams are going to be playing and, home and away and all that stuff.
Raiders are going to win the Super Bowl this year. First and foremost.
In case I didn't say it before, this is my cousin. And I've been hearing that statement since we were little kids. Every year. One of these years, I know, even though I'm a Giants fan, one of these years is going to come true, and he's going to say, I can hear it already. I told you.
So the Raiders open up the season Sunday, September 8th at the fake Los Angeles Chargers. I think this is a very interesting game. I want to try not to make predictions. I think this is an interesting game because it is an away game, but everybody knows that the Raiders own the Los Angeles area. They're the most popular team in LA. There's two teams in LA, the Rams and the Chargers, and the Raiders are more popular than both of them. I think it's an interesting game because it's Jim Harbaugh's first game coaching the Chargers. I don't expect the Chargers to all be on the same page. So I believe that the Raiders could go into Los Angeles and get a win. But I'm not predicting that. But I am predicting that. But I'm not predicting that. I think you're going to see a different Chargers team towards the end of the year with Harbaugh than you do see week one. The second game of the year is a tough game. They're going at Baltimore. Some people predict
Baltimore's always solid every year
to go to the Super Bowl, so I think that's a tough week. The next week is Carolina Panthers. It's a completely winnable game. It's the first home game. And then the fourth game of the year is home against the Browns. Again, I think it's a completely winnable game. That's the first quarter of the season. I think that's going to tell us a lot. We're going to know a lot about the offense. We're going to know a lot about Minshew. And we're going to know a lot about Antonio Pierce, the permanent head coach,
right,
by then. And then we get into at Denver, again, winnable. Against Pittsburgh, probably today we're going to know who Pittsburgh's starting quarterback is, but I expect the Steelers to be a very good team this year. And then Sunday, the October 20th, they're at LA Rams. Again, it's an away game, but it's kind of a home game, but it's an away game. So I think it's a winnable game. Sunday, October 27th, big test. They play Kansas City at home. You gotta hope magic appears. November 3rd at Cincinnati. I expect Cincinnati to be a very good team this year. I expect Joe Burrows to rebound.
Quarterback. Yeah.
The next week after that, they're at Miami. Again, I think it's a winnable game. They went into Miami last year in the middle of all the upheaval when AP first took over and they lost 21-14. It all comes down to, can you contain Tyreek Hill? You can go into Miami and beat them. November 24th, home against Denver. You have to beat the Broncos. I mean, you got to beat the Broncos both times this year, in my opinion. November 29th, they're at Kansas City. You know, you got to hope and pray. You're going into Kansas City. It's cold. It's towards the winter time, the end of November. You know, it's really hard to predict games 10, 12, 13 weeks in until you watch the first four games, in my opinion. Then we go to Tampa Bay. Again, I think it's a winnable game. Atlanta, you're home against Atlanta. Atlanta looks like a sneaky good team to me, but we'll see. Jacksonville, home again. Again, we'll see. Big game, big game. Sunday, December 29th at New Orleans. The return of Derek Carr. I think it's going to be a very big game for Derek Carr. Hopefully, it's a very good game for both teams. It's the second to last game of the year. And hopefully,
that's at New Orleans?
It's at New Orleans. Hopefully, both teams are sniffing the playoffs. Look, I root for Derek Carr. I'm not a Saints fan, but I root for Derek Carr. I have a feeling you're going to see the best out of Derek Carr in this game. If the Raiders defense can match that, they can definitely win. But you're definitely going to see the best out of Derek Carr. I think he's got something to say and something to prove.
He didn't want to go.
He didn't want to go. And then the end of the season, we're home against the Chargers, which is kind of cool if you think about it. And then I think you're going to see two different Charger teams. You're going to see not a lost team in the first game, but you're going to see a new team. I have enough faith in Harbaugh that by the end of the season, you're going to see a different Chargers team, just hopefully not as good as the Raiders team that AP put up in Week 18. One more thing of note is the bye week is Week 10 this year for the Raiders, which is unusual. Usually they get stuck with a bye week in the first 6 weeks. I think it's a good slot for the bye week for them, more towards the end of the season, middle end of the season.
Yeah, a bunch of film that you got to evaluate. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
I think that's very good. And that's about going to wrap it up for us. So if you've made it to the end of the video, thank you for making it here. Please drop comments below. Tell us what you think. Are we two idiots in a garage that don't know what we're talking about? Or should we do this again? Are you at least entertained by that? By all means, drop it in the comments below. What record do you think the Raiders will have this year? And we'll get to compare at the end of the season. And until next time, riderz Nation, Raiders Nation, be safe and live the dream.